Imagine waking up on your birthday and realizing it will be your last. Not because you're sick, not because of anything you've done, but because a woman you've never met has painted a number on a stone across the ocean, and that number happens to match your age. By sunset, you will dissolve into ash and rose petals. Your chroma, the energy that makes you real, will leave your body. And tomorrow, the city will carry on without you, because it has been carrying on without people like you for 67 years, and it has learned how to do it. This is the Gommage, and it is the beating, terrible heart of Clair Obscur Expedition 33. What I want to tell you tonight is not simply what the Gommage is. I want to tell you what it actually is, because this game spends its entire length building toward a revelation that reframes everything you thought you understood. The monster isn't the monster, the warning isn't a threat, and the most devastating event in Lumière's history is, at its core, something far more human than a death sentence. Full story spoilers ahead for all 3 acts and both endings. If you want to experience it fresh, come back after you've played. But if you're ready, settle in. This is one of the stranger and more beautiful stories video games have ever given us. Let's begin at the word itself. There is something almost gentle about the word. Gommage. It sits softly in the mouth, its syllables unhurried, unassuming. In French, and Clair Obscur, Expedition 33 is a deeply, intentionally French game, made by the roughly 30-person studio Sandfall Interactive. The word comes from the verb gommer, meaning to erase, to rub out, to scrub clean. In everyday usage, a gommage is a type of ritual skin exfoliation. You remove what has accumulated on the surface to reveal something fresh underneath. The developers chose this word knowing both its meanings. When something is erased in this world, it doesn't make a sound. No explosion. No grand tragedy, simply the moment before, and then the absence where something used to be. The game's title carries the same deliberateness. Clair Obscur translates as light dark, a reference to the Italian art term chiaroscuro, the technique painters use to create depth and form through dramatic contrast between light and shadow. Nothing in this world is named carelessly. The tension between presence and absence, between the painted and the erased, runs through every layer of what follows. When you hold both meanings of gommage in mind, erasure and ritual cleansing, something shifts. This is a story about a world that believes it is being destroyed by a monster, when the truth is something far stranger. The gommage isn't what everyone thinks it is. It never was. But we have to feel the weight of what the people of Lumière believe before we can feel the weight of what's actually happening. Picture a city born of another city's memory. Lumière stands as a version of Paris translated through longing. Cobblestone streets worn smooth by generations, gas lamps casting amber circles in the dark, iron railings curling with Art Nouveau elegance, cafes, and a skyline with something wrong in it. Something that draws the eye even when you try to look away. Across the water, on the distant continent, the monolith rises. A stone formation so tall it shouldn't exist, and painted upon it, in light that never dims, is a number. 67 years before our story begins, the fracture happened. Before it, Lumière was connected to the mainland, part of a larger Belle Époque world, that golden age of European art and progress that history would shatter. Then the fracture split the city from the continent, shattered the land beneath it, and set Lumière adrift in the ocean. The monolith appeared almost simultaneously. The number it displayed was 100. On the day that number first changed, when a towering, emaciated figure appeared, at the monolith's base, hollow where her face should be, white hair floating as though underwater, and pressed paint to stone. Every person in Lumière who was 100 years old or older dissolved into ash and flower petals. The people didn't understand it at first. They attributed the vanishings to the chaos of the fracture, to grief, to coincidence. For 15 years they told themselves other stories. Then, in monolith year 85, 2 pairs of elderly twins disappeared simultaneously the moment the Paintress changed the number. The lead writer Jennifer Svedberg-Yen confirmed this in an in-universe journal entry she wrote for fans. A record confirmed that the twins, named Anne and Gabrielle, vanished together, and the meaning of the countdown became undeniable. The number was an age. Every year, when the figure at the monolith painted a new, lower number, everyone who had reached that age was erased. The figure already had a name: the Paintress. The event was given a word: the Gommage. From that moment, life in Lumière reorganized itself entirely around the countdown. No grandparents, no elders guiding younger generations. Memory itself was dying, year by year, along with those who held it. What grew in their place was a culture of desperate intensity. Art pursued with fever, love pursued faster. Families formed young because no one expected to see their 40s. Orphanages became common. Foster households became points of honor. Children learned early to love people they knew they would lose. Being born the day after the Gommage was considered the best luck possible. As confirmed by the official Clair Obscur accounts, the Paintress only claimed those who had already reached the painted age on that specific day. Someone who turned 34 in the year the monolith displayed 34 would not be erased until the number fell to 33 the following year. 1 extra year. In Lumière, that was everything. Every year, Lumière sent its people out to die. That is the plain truth of the expeditions. 32 times, groups of volunteers, typically those with 1 year of life remaining before their own Gommage, crossed to the continent to hunt the Paintress. 32 times they failed to stop her. Most never returned at all, except for one. The very first expedition, retrospectively called Expedition 0, set out in monolith year 100 as a search and rescue mission before anyone understood what the monolith meant. Among its members were 2 people who would prove central to everything: a man named Renoir and his son Verso. This expedition actually reached the monolith, something no subsequent expedition would achieve for decades. But they were stopped there, at its barrier, by a woman who identified herself as Clair. 2 members of Expedition 0 returned to Lumière. The rest did not. What Renoir and Verso found at the monolith, the truth of what the Paintress was and who had made her, they kept to themselves for reasons the game only partially explains. The subsequent 32 expeditions, sent without that knowledge, walked into the continent blind. Their journals tell small, devastating stories. One expedition disguised themselves as Nevrons, the hostile creatures that populate the continent, and were discovered and slaughtered. Another made it farther than any before it by augmenting their abilities with music, only to encounter creatures deaf to everything but a different song. Members of one failed expedition, stranded after their mission collapsed, spent their final days attempting a climbing challenge set by local gestrels. One of them died with her only regret being that she never reached the top of the wall. Not the failed expedition, just the wall. These are the kinds of people who volunteer to fight the Paintress. Stubborn, hopeful, frightened. People who pour their last year of life into a chance they know is probably not going to work. By the time Expedition 33 departs, popular support for the program has quietly hollowed out. The goodbye party, as the game shows you in its opening hour, is sparsely attended. But Expedition 33 has something the others lacked. The Lumina Converter, developed by its leader Gustav and the scholar Lune, which harvests chroma from defeated Nevrons and converts it into shareable, ability-enhancing tools. A technology that changes the math of survival on the continent. And without knowing it, Expedition 33 carries the daughter of the Paintress herself. On the day before the expedition departs, the city gathers at the harbor. Gustav is 32. Sophie, the woman he once loved and perhaps still does, is 33. He walks beside her through the streets of Lumière, and the game does not rush this. It lets you hear children playing near a fountain, a flower seller complaining that fewer people buy flowers anymore, a man in red standing before a blank canvas, unable to find inspiration, a young man hiding inside a trash can, whispering that if the Paintress can't see him, maybe the Gommage won't find him. Today is his 33rd birthday. His name, in the credits, will not appear. This is the world the Gommage made, warm in its urgency, beautiful in its brevity, full of people who have learned to love hard and hold lightly because they have no other choice. At the harbor, the sun goes down. Across the water, the monolith glows with the number 34, and then the Paintress appears, that towering stone-pale faceless figure, and she paints. The number becomes 33. Sophie dissolves. Everyone her age dissolves. Ash and rose petals drifting across the harbor water. And then silence, and the shape of a city that is slightly smaller than it was an hour ago. The next morning, Expedition 33 sets sail. Almost immediately after landing on the dark shores, most of the expedition is destroyed, massacred by an old man with white hair leading an army of Nevrons. Gustav survives, along with 3 others: Lune, Shiel, and his foster sister Maëlle. What happens to Gustav later in Act 1, planned by Svedbergian and Broche from the very earliest stages of development, is the moment that makes you understand this story will not protect you from itself. He dies. The person the first act built as your anchor is gone, and what seemed like a story about a mission becomes something more personal, more uncertain, more alive. It falls to Maëlle now. Maëlle, who doesn't know what she is. Maëlle, who will not know until much later. The continent does not obey the laws of physics. That is the first thing expeditioners learn. Floating islands, impossible geometries, frozen cities, and crystal forests and ruins assembled by a logic that is not nature's, but something closer to the logic of memory, or a painting. The substance underlying everything here is chroma. It is the life force of the canvas, a word with enormous significance that the game reveals slowly, and it animates every created thing. When Gestrels die naturally, their chroma flows to a sacred river and cycles back into new life. When humans die in the Gommage, their chroma disperses back into the world. This is the detail, small and seemingly incidental in the early hours, that holds everything together once you know the full story. When expeditioners are killed by Nevrons, their chroma doesn't disperse. It stays trapped inside their bodies, frozen, unable to return. Their remains stay in place. Unlike the ash and petals of the Gommage, Nevron victims leave bodies behind. The game notes this contrast almost in passing. By the end, you understand exactly why it matters. Pictos are glowing glyphs used to channel chroma into abilities, summoning weapons, granting power, lending speed. They can be inscribed, transferred, shared. Gustav's Lumina converter creates additional copies from harvested Nevron chroma, and it is, in retrospect, thematically perfect. The technology that gives Expedition 33 its edge is a device for transforming what the enemy leaves behind into something life-sustaining. The Nevrons themselves look like unfinished things. Porcelain masks, half-sketched forms, the rough drafts of creatures that never got completed. They serve the Paintress, or so everyone believes. What we eventually learn is that they were created not by the Paintress at all, but by Clair Dessendre, who made them specifically to trap Chroma and prevent it from returning to someone else. The Gestrels, by contrast, are warm and slightly absurd, intelligent creatures devoted to combat as a form of self-expression, with their own honor codes and playful community. Monaco, who joins Expedition 33, is a shapeshifter who can take on the abilities of enemies. He is, it turns out, modeled after the Dessendre family's dog. Esquire, who serves as the expedition's means of crossing the sea, was once a stuffed toy on a boy's bedroom shelf. The continent doesn't feel designed. It feels remembered, assembled from the interior life of a child who put everything he loved into the one world he ever painted, then was taken before he could paint another. Here is where the story turns. The white-haired man who decimated the expedition upon landing, the painted Renoir, sun figure created by Aline, remained antagonistic throughout the journey. But there is another man who appears early, older, calm, silver-haired in a different way. He calls himself the Curator. He offers the expedition shelter, weapons upgrades, information. He seems genuinely to want the Paintress stopped. He even helps them craft the weapon capable of breaching the barrier around the monolith. This is the lie the game runs with extraordinary patience. Because once the expedition defeats the Paintress and believes the Gommage is over, once they return to Lumière as heroes, the Curator removes his disguise. His name is Renoir Dessendre, the real one, and he triggers the Sahasibtian, Gommage in full, instantly, without the careful annual restraint that Aline's presence had imposed. The entire population of Lumière vanishes. Everyone Maël has ever loved. Gone. In one act. The expedition thought it was ending the Gommage. It removed the only thing keeping the Gommage controlled. But why was Renoir conducting the Gommage in the first place? Why does a man who clearly loves his wife, who clearly grieves his son, cause 67 years of annual death for people he never met? The answer requires going further back than Lumière, further back than the fracture, back to a family in Paris and a fire in December 1905. In an alternate version of early 20th century Paris, the painters and the writers are at war. Both factions can reshape reality through their arts, the writers through language, the painters through paint. The Dessendres are among the most powerful painters in the city. Renoir and his wife Aline are the parents. Their children are Clea, eldest, Verso, the son, and Alicia, youngest. All carry the painter's gift. Specifically, painters can create canvas worlds within works of art, living dimensions sustained by a fragment of the painter's own soul, animated by chroma, populated with beings that live and love and experience their lives as genuinely as anyone outside. The risk of canvases is well known among painters. The physical body left behind in the real world still requires food, sleep, care. Extended immersion without tending to that body leads to deterioration. Painters train for this. It is fundamental discipline. Verso loved music more than painting. He was gifted, but his heart was in sound, in the particular sustain of a piano note. He painted exactly one canvas in his life, made as a child, as a playground, filling it with things he loved. A version of Paris filtered through a child's imagination, creatures shaped from toys and marionettes and the family dogs. A city called Lumière. He and Claire explored it together. Alicia came along sometimes. On a night in December 1905, the writers attacked the Dessendre manor and set it on fire. In the chaos, Verso died saving Alicia. Alicia survived, but was disfigured, and largely without voice. The fire left her alive and left her brother gone. It broke Aline. Grief, when it has nowhere to go, builds a house out of whatever it can find. For Aline, what it found was Verso's canvas. The one painting he had made still existed, and within it, the story implies, a fragment of the real Verso's soul remained as the canvas's animating spark. Aline, an experienced, disciplined paintress who understood the rules of canvas immersion better than almost anyone, went in anyway, because it was the one place where something of her son still existed. She began to paint. She made copies of her family inside the canvas, versions of Renoir, Clair, Alicia, and granted them immortality, so she could never lose them again. She painted more people, and sent entire cities' worth of citizens for Lumière, her canvas version of Paris. She poured everything into creation, and her real body, in Paris, began to fail. Renoir watched this happen. He saw his wife disappearing not into absence, but into art. He understood the rules. He knew what extended canvas immersion did to a living body. He made the decision of a man who is frightened and grieving and convinced he knows what's right. He entered the canvas to bring her home. The battle between two evenly matched, grief-stricken painters, Aline refusing to leave the last piece of her son, Renoir insisting the canvas was going to kill her, is what caused the fracture. The shock wave of their conflict shattered Lumière from the continent and sent it adrift into the ocean. Aline was sealed at the summit of the monolith. Renoir was sealed beneath it. The stalemate that followed lasted 67 years. From the summit, Aline could not stop Renoir from conducting the annual Gommage. Each year, he gathered enough chroma to erase the oldest of her painted creations before their natural chroma could dissipate back into the world and return to her, starving her of her creative energy year by year. The Nevrons, created by the real Clair who entered the canvas to tip the stalemate in her father's favor, served the same purpose. Chroma from Nevron kills was trapped inside the dead, unable to flow back to Aline. Even the accents, powerful beings Renoir painted as distorted interpretations of his family, were part of this machinery of depletion. The whole apparatus was built to drain a grieving woman of the power to paint. No chroma, no painting, no world worth staying in. And Aline, atop the monolith, painted the number as a warning. She painted what the Gommage was about to reach, so the people below would know how long they had. Whether this was a fully conscious decision or something more instinctive, an artist communicating in the only language left available. The game leaves open to interpretation, given her deteriorating mental state by the time Expedition 33 reaches her. But the pattern holds. She was painting the deadline so someone below might eventually understand what it meant. She was calling for help in the only language she had left. Here is what the game hides longest and earns most carefully. Alicia Dessendre, Verso's sister, the one who survived the fire, entered the canvas 16 years before the game begins, at Clair's urging. She went to help resolve the standoff between her parents. She was not a skilled painter. She was young and still learning. The moment she entered, Aline's chroma overwhelmed her. Instead of entering as herself, a painter maintaining conscious identity, she was absorbed into the canvas entirely. She emerged not as Alicia Dessendre, but as a character inside her mother's story, with no memory of Paris, the fire, the family, or any of it. She emerged as Maëlle. Maëlle grew up in Lumière. She loved the people her mother had painted. She became one of them so thoroughly that she joined Expedition 33 at 16, 9 years before her own Gommage, because she wanted to help the city she believed was her home. She had no idea the paintress at the top of the monolith was her mother. No idea the curator guiding the expedition was her father. No idea that the painted verso walking beside her was a copy of her dead brother, made from grief and love and the refusal to let go. When Gustav dies protecting her, which Svedberg Yen has confirmed was planned from the very earliest stages of development, a structural choice to shift the weight of the story onto Maëlle at exactly the moment the mission seems most broken. The revelation of Maëlle's true identity is still several hours away. But the camera has already pivoted. The story belongs to her now, and she carries it without knowing the full weight of what she's carrying. The reveal comes gradually. A masked girl who appears in her dreams, memories at the edges of her consciousness that don't belong to the life she lived in Lumière. By the time the canvas shows its full shape in Act 3, the truth feels less like a twist and more like finally being handed the context that was always missing. She was Alicia. She had been living inside her mother's grief for 16 years, loving painted people, being loved by them, becoming something neither fully herself nor fully her mother's creation, something new, made of both. Expedition 33 defeats the Paintress. The number on the monolith disappears. The expedition returns to Lumière as heroes. For one brief moment, it seems like 67 years of loss might actually mean something. Then the curator reveals himself as the real Renoir and triggers the full Gommage. Without Aileen's presence maintaining the slow, measured annual erosion, without her using the number as a warning and a delay, there is nothing to restrain what Renoir can do. Every citizen of Lumière dissolves at once. Every person Maëlle has ever known, gone, in a single act that the expedition accidentally made possible by removing the one protector the canvas had. This is the game's most quietly devastating structural choice. The expedition succeeded at its stated mission. It also destroyed exactly what it came to save. What follows is Maëlle. Now also Alicia. Both lives present within her, her memories returned, fighting her own father for control of the canvas. Not because she doesn't understand the truth, because she has decided the truth doesn't reduce the realness of what she lived. Lune was real, Ciel was real, Gustav was real. Painted people or not, the love inside the canvas was not pretend. And Renoir, for his part, is not simply a villain. He is a father who entered a painting to save his dying wife, became trapped in a 67-year stalemate he never wanted, and watched thousands of lives end as the unintended casualty of a domestic crisis between two grieving parents. The game's lead writer has said in interviews that the story was never intended to be about good versus evil. It was always about people who genuinely love each other, making choices that cause terrible harm because they cannot find a common language for their grief. The final choice places you between two painted people who cannot agree on what to do with the same sum. The painted verso wants to free the last fragment of the real verso's soul from the burden of sustaining the canvas. He wants to end his immortality. He has existed for 67 years as a copy of a boy who preferred piano to painting. And he is exhausted in the way only something that cannot die can be exhausted. He believes, and this reading is supported by the pattern the story establishes, that keeping the canvas running perpetuates the cycle of avoidance. That Aline disappeared into it. That Maëlle is beginning to. That the pattern will repeat forever unless someone ends it here. Maëlle wants to stay. She has lived 16 years as Maëlle, in a city full of people she loves. Verso is her brother. Gustav was her first real home. She believes that painted lives are still lives, that the love was real even if the world was made, that grief is not a reason to dissolve everything that grew from it. Both of them are right. Both of them are wrong. The developers confirmed they argued extensively about which ending was the good one. Broche's position is that there isn't one, that the answer depends on what you believe about grief and created life, and the difference between healing and avoidance. It depends on what you believe Maëlle owes the real world, and what she owes the painted one. In Verso's ending, the canvas destroyed, Maëlle returned to the real world as Alicia. The Dessendre family gathers at a grave. There is grief there, and the beginning of something beneath it. The willingness to face the loss without a painting to escape into. In Maëlle's ending, the canvas preserved, Lumière rebuilt, Verso repainted and playing piano in a concert hall as he once promised. Her eyes are already stained with the blue-silver of chroma, the same marks that were on Aline's face. The game doesn't explain this. It shows it, and it trusts you to understand what it means. The cycle has not broken. It has simply found a gentler form. Neither ending lies to you. Neither promises safety. Both are honest about what grief costs when it has nowhere to go. There is one last thing worth sitting with before we close. The gommage. The word. The event. The thing 67 years of Lumière built its entire culture around. The thing that sent 33 expeditions across the ocean. The thing that took Sophie at the harbor while Gustave watched. It was a warning. Not a perfect one. Not a kind one. Not one that could be deciphered from the outside without the context of what was happening inside the monolith. But a warning. Painted by a woman trapped at the summit of a stone tower, using the only language she still had access to, trying to tell the people she had made how much time they had before her husband reached them. Every expedition that failed was trying to stop the Paintress. Every expedition that died on the continent was trying to end the Gommage. And the figure they were hunting was, in a way the game earns across 3 acts, the person working hardest to keep them alive as long as possible. The story of the Gommage is a story about how grief, when it has no form and no witness and no way to resolve, eventually builds one for itself. How it creates structures, erects systems, generates whole worlds, and how those worlds, beautiful and real and full of people who love within them, become simultaneously the expression of the grief, and the thing that prevents the grief from ever fully moving through. The Gommage is not a villain's weapon. It is a mother's signal, read wrongly by everyone who received it for 67 years, until one expedition made it far enough and survived enough losses to finally understand what was being said. And by then, the cost of understanding was everything. That is the Gommage. That is what happens when your age is painted. It is a story that told something true, that grief doesn't stay where you put it, that it expands, that it can build entire worlds and still not be enough. And it asked, at the very end, a question it was wise enough not to answer for you. When you love something that exists inside a painting, when the people in it are real to you in every way that matters, what do you owe the world outside the frame? I hope this journey sat well with you tonight. I hope you carry a little of Lumière with you wherever you are. Its desperate beauty, its people who wore flowers in their hair and walked to the harbor and made something like peace with the number on the horizon. If this helped you rest or helped a story settle into place, a like and a subscribe keeps this little channel lit. It means more than you might expect. Until next time, sleep well.